At my graduation party, my mother stood before a crowd of family, friends, and acquaintances, her glass raised high, her voice filled with triumph. "My child has achieved something amazing today," she announced, beaming with pride that wasn't really about me. "And as we all know, this degree belongs to the family. So let's celebrate her first paycheck going where it should, straight to me." She stretched out her hand, expecting obedience. Expecting me to play along, just as I always had. I smiled. "Actually, I have a surprise for you." Before she could respond, security guards entered the room. Her expression turned from smugness to shock, her face paling as realization set in. For most, graduation is a time of celebration, a milestone of achievement shared with loved ones. For me, it was a battle, a final, decisive move in a war I had been quietly preparing for years. I knew my mother well. She always found a way to take what was mine. But this time I was ready. Growing up, my mother cared deeply about appearances. To the outside world, she was a devoted, hard-working parent, tirelessly supporting her children, sacrificing everything for their success. At home, the reality was starkly different. Every kindness came with a price. If she spent money on me, she expected something in return. Good grades weren't for my future. They were ammunition for her bragging rights. Every decision, every aspect of my life, was under her control. My schedule, my friendships, even my dreams were dictated by her. When I earned a full-ride scholarship to my dream university, she made it clear. "This degree belongs to the family. Your paycheck, your bank account, your future, all mine." I was 17, legally trapped, with no way to escape her grasp. So I did the only thing I could. I played along. I smiled. I agreed. I let her believe she had won. While she gleefully spoke of quitting her job to live off my future earnings, I was carefully laying the groundwork for my freedom. First, I kept my scholarship documents hidden. She believed she controlled my funds, but in reality, they were solely in my name. Second, I secured a part-time job on campus. It didn't pay much, but she didn't even know it existed. Third, I opened a bank account in another state, using a different mailing address. Every dollar I earned was safely tucked away, far from her reach. And lastly, I gathered evidence. Every text, every email, every voicemail in which she demanded my money or threatened me for wanting to keep even a small portion of it. I saved it all. By the time graduation arrived, I was ready. She threw a grand party, 100 guests, a spectacle designed not to celebrate me, but to showcase herself. She had spent years molding this narrative. The selfless mother who had given everything for her child's success. She expected me to perform my role in her story. Instead, I rewrote the ending. When the security guards entered, the room fell into stunned silence. My mother's confident facade crumbled as I stepped forward. "This party isn't just a celebration," I said, my voice steady. "It's an eviction." Confusion spread across the faces of the guests, but my mother understood instantly. She started to argue, to raise her voice, but I didn't flinch. I had done my research. The house we lived in, the very one she had claimed as hers, was legally mine. My father had left it to me in his will when he passed away, and she had no legal claim to it. I had spoken to a lawyer, ensured every detail was airtight, prepared every necessary document. She had 30 days to leave. Gasps rippled through the room. Some guests quietly excused themselves, while others stood frozen in disbelief. My mother's voice rose, desperate now, clinging to the last threads of control. "This is my home. You can't do this to me." One of the security guards stepped forward. "This is a legal eviction. If you refuse to leave, the authorities will be called." She fell silent. I turned, walking away from the party with my diploma in one hand and my freedom in the other. I had won, or so I thought, but my mother was not the kind of woman to accept defeat. It began with phone calls. Unknown numbers, fake accounts, messages dripping with manipulation. "You took everything from her. She sacrificed so much for you. How could you do this to your own mother?" At first, I ignored them. I changed my number, locked down my social media. Then the bank called. Someone had attempted to access my account. They failed, but the attempt had come from my hometown. There was only one person desperate enough to try. She had spent years forcing me to hand over my personal information. Even though I had changed my details, she must have remembered something. So I locked down my finances further. New banks, new security measures, fraud alerts. Silence followed. And then the police showed up at my door. 2 officers stood there, their expressions unreadable. "Are you my name?" one asked. I nodded, a cold weight settling in my stomach. We received a report that you committed financial fraud against your mother, he continued. She claims you stole her home and kicked her out illegally. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I calmly handed them my paperwork, my father's will, the house title, the eviction notice, all stamped and legal. One officer flipped through the documents and sighed. This isn't the first time we've dealt with cases like this, he muttered. She's wasting our time. They left. But I knew she wasn't done. A few weeks later, my workplace called me in. There's been a concern, my manager said. I frowned. What kind of concern? He sighed, looking uncomfortable. A woman claiming to be your mother called. She says she's worried about you, says you have mental health issues, that you stole from your family, and that we should be careful around you. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just revenge. She was trying to destroy my future. Do you believe her? I asked quietly. He shook his head. No, but we had to ask. It's policy. Relief flooded me, but so did anger. She had gone too far. I made a decision. I called my uncle, her older brother, the only person in the family who had ever stood up to her. She's desperate, he said. And desperate people do stupid things. I know, I whispered. I just need her to stop. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. She's staying with some guy, he said. Not from around here. And from what I hear, he's bad news. I gripped my phone tighter. Bad how? She's been telling him all about you, your job, your apartment, your life. And I think he's the one pushing her to go after you. My hands went numb. This wasn't just her anymore. She had a partner. I had spent years planning my escape. Now, I had to decide how to end it for good. The door behind my mother creaked open, and then I saw him. Her boyfriend. He was tall, unkempt, with a wiry build and eyes that sent a chill through me. Something about him made my skin crawl. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. And I wasn't going to let them win. I should have walked away. I should have left them standing there in their crumbling little world. But something stopped me. My mother. She didn't look like the one in control anymore. She looked nervous. And that scared me more than anything. The man took a step forward, tilting his head as he studied me. His lips curled into a slow smirk. So you're the little moneymaker, he said. My mother shot him a sharp look, but he ignored her. I clenched my fists. I'm not giving you anything. He laughed, a low, mocking sound. Oh, you don't have to. He reached into his jacket and tossed an envelope toward me. Consider this a warning. I caught it, my heart pounding. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Me walking to work. Me leaving my apartment. Me getting into my car. All taken from a distance. My stomach dropped. You've been following me. My voice was steady, but inside I was trembling. The man grinned. Relax. No harm done. He tilted his head. Yet, I looked at my mother. She wasn't gloating anymore. For the first time, she seemed afraid. And that's when it hit me. She hadn't expected this. She thought she was using him, but he was the one in control. I forced myself to push the envelope back into his hands. You think this scares me? I said, my voice cold. His smirk faltered just a little. Good. I turned to my mother. This is who you ran to? A washed-up thug with a cheap camera? Her face burned red. Watch your mouth. Or what? I glanced back at him. He's going to keep stalking me and taking pictures? I took a step forward, watching his jaw tighten. What's next? A fake lawsuit? Or are you actually dumb enough to try something illegal? His expression darkened. Men like him hated feeling powerless. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Here's my warning. Keep following me. Keep sending threats. And I'll bury you in so much legal trouble you'll be drowning in paperwork for the rest of your miserable life. Then I turned back to my mother. And if you think this guy is going to take care of you, you're dumber than I thought. Her eyes flashed with anger. I don't need to be taken care of. Then why are you living in a dump with a man whose only skill is intimidation? Silence. She hated being called out. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked away, but the whole drive home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I knew it wasn't over. And I was right. 2 days later, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't steal much, just made a mess. Clothes thrown onto the floor. Drawers ripped open. The fridge left wide open, its contents spoiling. It was a message. I couldn't prove it was him. But I knew. And if I didn't stop this now, I would never be safe. So I made a call. Not to the police. Not to my lawyer. To someone who hated my mother even more than I did. My father's sister. She had cut ties with my mother years ago, but she had connections. And when I told her everything, she didn't hesitate. "Give me his name," she said. "I'll handle it." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. Less than a week later, my mother's boyfriend was gone. No social media. No phone number. Nothing. And my mother? She called me, crying. "What did you do?" she demanded. I just smiled. Consider this a warning. The last time I heard his name was during that call, her voice shrill with desperation. She screamed, she demanded answers. I didn't give her any. For the first time, I had the upper hand. But I should have known she would never give up. A month passed. I thought I had finally shaken her off. Then one night, I came home from work, exhausted, ready to collapse into bed. But the second I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But things were out of place. A chair slightly moved. A picture frame tilted. And the faint scent of perfume, one I hadn't worn in years. She had been here. And she had left something behind. A letter sitting neatly on my kitchen counter. I didn't want to pick it up. But I did. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. She wanted me to meet her. One last time. I went. Not to forgive her. Not for closure. I went because I needed answers. She chose a quiet diner outside of town. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting alone in a booth, a cup of coffee in front of her. She wasn't drinking it. She looked tired. I slid into the seat across from her. "Breaking into my apartment?" I said. "Classy." She shook her head. "I didn't break in." Her voice was quiet. "I still have a key." My jaw clenched. She must have copied my spare before she left. "I'll be changing the locks," I said. She didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled envelope, pushing it toward me. I didn't touch it. "What's this?" Her eyes met mine. The truth. I hesitated, then slowly opened it. Inside were old legal documents, yellowed with age. My stomach twisted as I scanned the names. And then I saw it. It wasn't my name. It was someone else's. Birth certificate. Custody papers. My hands shook. I looked up at her, and for the first time in my life, she wouldn't meet my eyes. "I thought I had more time," she whispered. "I wanted to fix it before you found out." My throat felt tight. "What the hell is this?" She swallowed hard. "You're not my daughter." The world tilted. "No," I whispered. "This is some kind of sick joke." "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have told you years ago." I stared at her, at the woman who had taken everything from me. And none of it had ever been hers to take. I didn't remember standing up. I just walked out. She called after me. "Please, just talk to me." I didn't turn around. I drove home in a daze. That night, I changed my locks. Blocked her number. And then I started searching. It took months. Private investigators. Court records. A tangled mess of bureaucracy. But I found them. And when I finally stood on the doorstep of the house where I should have grown up, my heart pounded. I knocked. The door opened. A woman stood there. My real mother. And when she saw me, she burst into tears. My phone buzzed for weeks after that. Messages. Emails. Voicemails from the woman who raised me, begging for a chance to explain. I deleted them all. Because some things can't be forgiven. For years, I thought I was trapped. That she was my responsibility. She wasn't. And now, finally, I was free.